The practice of love offers no place of safety. We risk loss, hurt, pain. We risk being acted upon by forces outside our control. Bell Hooks. The Dragon Pod, from Bending Not Breaking. Book 5, Ocean. Chapter 8, Finnegrin's Wake. And we're back for another episode of the Dragon Pod. This is your host, Ben Pruitt, and I am thrilled that everyone is here listening. And I know you've all been waiting for this episode. This is a big one. Lots happening. So much going on. So much Arcanum things. It's just a really cool thing going on. And I wanted to make sure that we had some incredible guests for you this whole season. And I'm going to be real with y'all. I didn't hold back on this episode. I am excited to introduce to you all, some of you for the first time, some of you will have heard these voices before, but first I'll introduce Devon Giehl, uses she, her pronouns, and is the lead writer and producer on the Dragon Prince team, and recently has tweeted a significant amount about Baldur's Gate 3. Devon is a pro podcaster with us at this point and has brought someone this time to make it even better. That's right, folks. We have another guest, and our other guest is Iain Hendry, uses he, his pronouns, and he is a longtime writer with Wonderstorm team alongside Devon. And Iain recently tweeted about being emotionally compromised by a game called Triangle Strategy. And we have them joining us together because they had a big part in writing today's episode. And I'm thrilled to welcome you both. Who wants to go first and say how you're doing? How's life? What's going on?
Well, first, we're clearly going to have some kind of like side podcast where we argue about whether or not Baldur's Gate 3 is more emotionally ravaging than Triangle Strategy. I think I've got that one on lock, though.
Devon, you don't understand the challenges of having to fight Gustadolf's forces when he clearly cannot win this war, but maybe he knows something that you don't. I could rhapsodize this game for a little while, but essentially it really surprised me. All the characters talk in like really stuffy formality. It bombards you with a bunch of politics and world history and proper nouns for 3 hours, and I'm like, this is stupid. I'm just in for the strategy RPG nonsense. And then 3 hours later, I'm like on the verge of tears because it's got its hooks into me. So Baldur's Gate 3 is a stupid game for losers.
Okay, you win.
Yeah,
that's not true. I love Baldur's Gate 3 as well. Please don't attack me online.
I will admit, I have not played it yet. I had someone get it to me for my birthday, but I was in the middle of my Final Fantasy 16 run through. And so I have yet to play it because grad school started. And here we are.
It's okay. It'll be there later, but it's totally worth it. Good
yeah, I'll get to it eventually, one day. But yeah, welcome both of you. I'm thrilled to have you for this emotionally ravaging episode. And you all had a really interesting history with it, having spent a majority of your time writing it. So I'm excited to dive in. But before we do, I just want to hear just a little bit more about you all and how's life? What's new with you? What are things that are on your mind these days?
People know that we're married, right? That's it's like I'll say that.
You're married?
Yeah. Somehow we managed to be married and work together at the same time, which is a whole other thing. But Iain, what's up? What's going on?
Oh, this and that. I guess we announced recently, so I guess we could say it here, but it's been a pretty big year for us. We moved. Dragon Prince Season 5 came out. That's probably the biggest one. And then also we're expecting a child very soon. Anyway, we can move on from there.
The biggest thing is Dragon Prince Season 5 for sure. Absolutely incredible. It's like a baby, it's out in the world now and growing up, and very exciting.
All on its own.
Yeah, it's all on its own now. Man, people are talking about it, critiquing it, giving it all the things, all the tweets. or posts now. Ew,
And
gross.
that is why we won't tweet or share a lot about our real life baby. not the subject to the scrutiny of the internet the way that a season of fiction can be.
Indeed. Yeah. Well, I wish you both well, and may
Thank
blessings
you.
received
Exciting.
from all the people who would send them to you. Amazing. So tell me about what it has been like on from your perspective to have season 5 drop. What has been your experience with the drop of the season? What has been your thoughts and feelings around it?
I think this episode that we're about to get into caused a bit, I don't know if more of a splash than I expected is quite right. I kind of knew that we pushed some boundaries with this one and that people would react to it. But honestly, it's been kind of a joy. I think there's a lot of kind of thematic heft that we were hoping people would pick up in this kind of arc of episodes towards the end of the season here, and they definitely have done that from my read of the community and gone, even further beyond, kind of like picking up a lot of great, interesting character threads. So I don't know. I think there's no kind of bigger joy for a writer than seeing an audience dig really, really deep into it, share what all the kind of themes and the character developments mean to them, and kind of develop beyond that. So it's been really great from my perspective.
Amazing. Anything, does that echo your thoughts, Devon?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little like cheeky and indulgent with this one because I feel like my personal taste runs quite a bit darker and grittier than my actual work on the Dragon Prince, which I love working on, but sometimes I have to indulge my actual taste. And I got to do that a little bit in this episode, admittedly.
Yeah.
And we kept talking as we were working on it. We would ask ourselves, like, can we actually do that? Is this, are we going to get in trouble? And Netflix let us do all the things that are in this episode. So I'm still a little surprised. And I think we were tasteful. I never like to claim that we do stuff just to be shocking or like to push boundaries on purpose, but like the roughness of the episode, I think, contributes heavily to the themes we were going for, and that is what made it worth doing in that particular tone. So it makes me happy because I love to write stuff with this level of heaviness.
Oh yeah.
And so I'm really happy that people liked it because I'm like, yes, me too.
Proof of concept. We can do more. Amazing. Yeah. So let's I'm curious. You all have been hinting at these moments, and of course, most of the people have theoretically watched this episode already. But I'm curious if we dive into you all as kind of this primal source here, being around some of these moments that you were hesitant about, or these moments that you were like, "Ooh, can we include that?" Or definitely do this, but like, should we? I'm curious what those moments are from your perspective, or if not that, then just the details around how some of this came about. What made this episode happen? Where did it come from?
I'll share the very first one. I wasn't sure we were going to be able to do is not something that's dark or horrible. It's just the sea shanty at the beginning. Like, was this bug that I had in my brain since I first wanted to do it somewhere in the initial episodes with Vilas in season 2. I was like, we should write like a fun little song and have it play on the end credits. And it didn't get any traction then. But this time around, I was like, I really wanted to write a stupid little song. And when you pitch stuff like this, it's technically, it's so high effort, and you have to internalize like it could get cut at any time, just because there's more valuable things to be spending your time and money and effort on when you're making a cartoon on a TV budget. So I kept thinking at every stage, like, we're going to trim the song, and it never got trimmed. And so something we quote got away with is this very sort of like special and standalone intro that took a lot of effort and time, and we had tons of people had to go sing backup vocals, including Ian. He's in there somewhere. The amount of effort required to get just like a minute and a half of like special high effort music in a 22 minute episode of television was surprising to me, and that made me surprised that it survived. So that's the first thing, is we got to do the special little intro. But then Ian, you talk about all the other stuff we got away with.
This was definitely, I would say, the hardest episode to write, to break the story on, of this entire season. I don't think we came into it knowing literally everything that would like sometimes some episodes you kind of know what the episode has to accomplish from a kind of story perspective, and then all of the the characters being the characters kind of gets you there with all the kind of like the themes and stuff just present themselves to you, and it all clicks together in a really pleasant way. This episode had a far higher than usual sitting in silence in, at this point, a Zoom call, because for season 4 and 5 we transitioned to video chats like we're on just now for writing the show. And I think this was the first time in the first couple seasons back that we'd had that kind of like sitting in absolute silence, not being totally sure how to proceed with some of the tough episodes, questions of the episode. And that was extra awkward for me over video chat. I think we were still kind of like developing our new norms around, trying to fill the silence. Can you tell if anyone has anything going on? But to go into the kind of, thing of control, I think sometimes when you're doing kind of group writing, that can be extremely anxiety inducing when you're like, are we getting anywhere? Are we doing anything? Are we completely lost at sea on this episode here? But sometimes you do have to trust that the brains in the room are ticking, sometimes that you just need the time to mull things over. And you don't need to just start saying things for the sake of saying things. But also sometimes it's worth throwing out your little bad idea, find the things you can control, and help nudge the ship forwards.
Yeah. Generally speaking, this is from my personal opinion here. I do really well when I'm collaborating on projects with plans and implementation. But I feel the anxiety bubbling in my stomach when I imagine writing a creative thing in collaboration with other people. I'm just creativity more by myself. And so I just imagine sitting in a room trying to be creative with people about writing, especially when everyone's so bought in and it feels such high stakes, I imagine. I just have a little anxiety ball in my stomach just thinking about it. So I totally understand. Yeah. Wild.
Yeah, I mean, there's a funny feeling that happens where when something that was previously extremely formless and terrifying, the kind of there's classic writer advice when you're just kind of writing something by yourself to get something down on the blank page, because obsessing over trying to get it to be perfect first time is impossible. But it's a more abstract feeling kind of happens when you're doing it in that kind of group outlining session, but it's still extremely satisfying, and my heart kind of leaps when I start to feel like there's a shape to an episode that I can actually, kind of metaphorically grab onto. And yeah, that's the kind of, I guess, the anxiety of feeling lack of control slowly going away and feeling like, okay, I think I know the direction here. I think I know what we can do with this.
Yeah. Wild. It's wild to me. And you've given us the segue, I think, to the lens for today. And so we've talked about control, and control. There are times where being on the nose with a lens is a little it's a little boring, but there's so much around control and so many aspects that are touched on that I think it is a really apt way to dive into this episode, even though it's verbatim talked about by all the characters. I mean, it's really a big word, and so I would love to unpack it a little bit and identify one, what is it, and two, you've given us a little example from your perspective, Ian, but maybe Devon, if you have a time where you've experienced control, I'd love to hear kind of what control feels like, or lack of it feels like, maybe for you as well. That was a series of questions. How do we feel about tackling those?
Great.
So
you're
in control now.
First of all, yeah, I'm in control. Got this. in terms of the lens being extremely on the nose, I totally agree. This is admittedly one of those types of episodes where all the characters say the theme out loud, like and almost look at the camera about it, but hopefully they don't look at it too hard. Which is like a choice, you know, like sometimes just the theme is so present that it just comes out that way. But I think like part of the reason that I enjoyed writing this episode so much is that like my own relationship with control is very fraught, and I have like a very difficult time with not having it in like really sort of mundane ways sometimes. Anyway, I guess you asked like what does control mean, and it's sort of the ability to direct your own experience, your own fate, your own direction in life and all things. And that can be like huge picture, and it can also be like I personally, one thing that I'm always being self-deprecating about is that I don't let anybody else drive ever, because I consider myself arrogantly a better driver than the whole world, which is possibly, and you know, possibly extremely ironic if I end up dying tomorrow in a car accident. But I I have this like
not.
Sorry, I'm a really glib person about this. But no, but I mean I have this sort of like weird need for that to be the case, which is like I joke about it being like it's a good manifestation of my weird control freak issues, because you know it means my friends can have more fun, and I'm totally okay being like designated driver or whatever, and I'll just like take the responsibility because I feel like I'm best at it. Which is not, it's not really like a good story or anything, but that's sort of like the weird little micro manifestation of something that I struggle with like as a whole.
Oh, I think that's a really good example. I think that really helps us, because I think that it's those little anecdotes around the moments that are like probably maybe not ubiquitous, but certainly accessible to so many people. Like I can definitely think of places in which I'm like, nope, I do that because I feel like I am better than. And so it's an interesting, like, control has a relationship with comparison in a way, is what we're gleaning from this, which is really interesting to think about. And I think we can see that in the episode too. So I think that's a neat way to expand on that.
And I do think there's like, yeah, there's this comparison, and then it can, like I said, I think this is a positive manifestation, because I'm like, I will take control of this particular situation because I think it is safest if I'm the one doing this. And I can get myself and my friends all through this very statistically dangerous activity if I am the one in control of it. But then, I mean, that same thing in a situation where it's not about driving a car, you know, control can be an incredibly selfish endeavor. You know, I am protecting only me. I am acting out of anxiety to, you know, control what happens in, make sure that it lands in my favor and nothing bad can happen to me, but you know, at the cost of everybody else. And I think that's kind of what the episode sort tends to veer for.
It's an interesting comparison too, because I think about the quote of like, a ship is safe in its harbor, but that's not what ships are built for. And I think about like we attempt to control the safety of this ship by like protecting it from what it is destined to do theoretically. And I'm reminded of the opening quote from Bell Hooks of around love and love. Excuse my southern accent. The practice of love offers no place of safety, right? We risk loss, hurt, and pain. And anytime we get in a car, like, we are risking loss, hurt, safety, pain, because we risk being acted upon by forces outside of our control. Like, the only thing we can control is how we maneuver on the road, and there are millions of other cars. And so it's an interesting perspective to think like, when do I think I have control and what I have control over, and then like how that is compared to the larger fact of that I am surrounded by other people who have agency. And it's wild. It's wild to think about.
It's very scary, and I think it is, and the thing I'll probably get into more in the actual episode discussion, but I think it is a very important step in like self-awareness and growing up is
Agreed.
understanding the like the friction between your own agency and your ability to impact the world versus the world's ability to do the exact same thing back at you, and exactly how those those forces interact and can really make things suck, or you can make it rule. I don't know. It's too hard. It's an unsolvable problem. But yeah, that's sort of the like actual grit to me of specifically what Callum is going through in the episode.
Absolutely.
I brought a little personal story that Devon's gonna be mad at me for sharing afterwards. But what does control mean to me?
Go for it. We can fight after.
There was a time before Devon and I were dating where we had both kind of laid our cards on the table, so to speak. We knew there was romantic interest there, but Devon was not currently in a place in her life where she was able to commit to me, to Iain Hendry, and that was naturally frustrating to me. And there was a day where I was hanging out with my our good friend, and we weren't really sure what was going through Devon's mind. We kind of made it a point where I kind of have to step back. It's kind of like let her think things through, etc. And it was actually Valentine's Day, and I was going to just get a drink with my friend and kind of hang out. And I was kind of like, I don't know what I should be doing here, right? Like, I feel like I've said what I want to say. I don't know what's going through Devon's mind. But I'm just kind of like, it's just kind of painful to sit here and do nothing about it. And my friend just kind of said, look, you've done everything you can do. Everything else about this situation is out of your control. Like it's on Devon now. I think the wheels are turning in the right direction, but if they're not, you're just gonna have to be okay with that. The thing you're doing right now, sitting here drinking a Sprite, you're doing exactly the right thing that you should be doing right now. And then it did work out, giving Devon time and space to think through things. Clearly, now we are now married and writing episodes of the Dragon Prince together. So, yeah, sometimes you just got to sit down, drink a Sprite. That's all you can do. That's all you should be doing.
I hate you. No, that was a tumultuous time in my life where I love the image. This is I'll leave it at that image of it distilled down to like me really going through it somewhere in the dark and like Iain sitting there drinking a Sprite. Like I think that's a perfect summation of like, what was this now, 10 years ago? Jeez.
It was 10 years ago. Hate to think that. Another thing we don't have control over, the march of time.
Yeah, that's for sure. Man, all right. So, okay, there are so many thoughts that are going through my head around control, and I'm gonna have to control myself here and hold those back a little bit, because I want to wait till we get to the actual discussion of the episode. But before we do, we want to remind our listeners what went down in the episode. And so I'm going to toss it to either of you. You know what's coming. We have the responsibility to offer our listeners a 30-second recap. So I will do one. I will own it instead of making both of you do it. But one of you or both of you are going to offer us a 30-second recap. How would you like to approach this?
I'll give it a go.
Iain's doing it as cost for sharing the personal story.
Yep.
Amazing.
Let me get my little stopwatch up here.
Yeah. Whenever you're ready, I can count you in.
Yep, I'm good to go.
All right. 3, 2, 1, go.
Previously on the Dragon Prince, the gang is trying to find Erebos' prison. They now know where it is and what it is, but they need to get there and they get a boat. But they get got by a bad guy who also has a better boat. So now they're stuck on the boat. Now on this episode, Callum is being tortured by a bad guy. Bad guy wants a spell to get control of the ocean again. That's the theme. And it's not going well because Callum won't cough it up because he's never done dark magic before, except that's a lie. He totally has done dark magic before. The guy does a bunch of kind of like psychological torture on Callum as well, offering him control over the situation, which he doesn't really have, blah, blah, blah. Callum refuses, but Callum gets frustrated and punches him in the face, which causes more torture, including maybe the death of his girlfriend. But then Callum has a cool little epiphany about the ocean, and it gives him special powers to win the fight against the big bad man. That was way over 30 seconds, but we did it.
Was, but I was like,
why did you do it previously on?
Because you had to understand why they were on the boat, right? No.
Netflix skips those automatically, even though we painstakingly put those together.
Well, you can tell Netflix not to skip them automatically, which is what I have to do because otherwise. Anyway, I digress. All right, I have my timer ready to go. Will you count me in?
Absolutely. You ready?
Ready.
3, 2, 1, go.
All right, so there's a she shanty, and then Finnegrin wants just a little spell, and so he tortures Callum to kill Domina and wants that. And then where's Janai? And then Ferris appeals to the High Sunfire Court people, and everybody wants to lose a hand for Callum. And then Amaya's a boss until Kimmy shows up with Janai. And then Finnegrin's a bloodbender, and then Callum caves when Rayla's threatened. And then Kareem is just a murderous jerk murder man. And then Janai survives and is a badass. And then Callum escapes and sinks with the ocean. And then Elmer and Soren have a moment, and then Finnegrin's fish food, and then Callum used dark magic again. Woo!
Looks like
you've done it.
You have training at this sort of thing.
I have been doing this for 5 years. and still I can, like, 2 episodes ago I had a terrible one with Jesse as the guest. And so I was just like, man, I really flubbed on this one. So even the pros mess up. I'm just saying.
That's
good to
506. I have to hear it.
Maybe not going a full 30 seconds over the 30 seconds, but it is.
I have no sense of time.
Just don't do it previously on Ian. That's your takeaway. So when we come back for a season 6 episode, I'm going to remind you.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So I'm going to toss it to you all first. There are so many different ways we could approach this. And so I'm going to toss it to either of you. What is a moment of control in this episode that you'd like to tap into first?
We're gesturing at each other on Zoom. You can't hear that, but we're just I guess I'll talk about Finnegrin a little just up top as the sort of antagonist who sort of embodies this theme as a bit of a monster. This is a guy of massive charisma. He controls things through force of personality until push comes to shove and you actually find out he has a very significantly visceral way of exerting control as his sort of fallback. And one line that I really like of his is when that reveal occurs. He explains that, you get the impression that his personality has a lot to do with it, but he explains that this is actually the reason people follow me and obey me and are, my whole crew is sort of this silent, dead-eyed fear factory is because his ability to cause this incredible physical distress at the moment he is crossed at a certain line. And that's the Icy Vein spell, which is a torture spell. It's excruciating. And he says the chains are just for show. Which I think is very melodramatic of him, but I really admire that he takes this so literally that he still puts chains on people. He still sort of talks this big game about, giving people the freedom of choice to follow him, the illusion of, I give you that choice to figure out who is going to lose a hand and whatnot. But when it really comes down to it is he's going to get his way, and he knows he's going to get his way because he has this this ability to cause harm. And I find that to be a moment that's very revealing for who he is. He's sort of bullshitting about the theme the whole time, and he's allowing people to believe themselves free. But at the end of the day, he has this self-assurance that I will win. And I think that comes from a place. Well, I'll get into it in a bit. Ian, you do one.
No, I mean, it's really interesting to me that his closest henchman, Deadwood, as he calls him, is the one person on the ship that he cannot use that spell on. And obviously, it seems like a tactical error by the end of the episode. We'll get into that. But I can only imagine that for someone like Finnegrin, that was kind of his reassurance that it's not just magical powers. Like if I lost my magical powers, I would still have it. Like this person is much more physically powerful than me. My kind of special talents cannot control him if he's ever against me, and yet he does everything I say. So just the sheer force of who I am is enough to control this person. And it takes a fairly major breakthrough with another character that I'm sure we'll talk about later to to crack through that for Deadwood. So in a lot of ways, Finnegrin was absolutely right. The chains were just for show. The magic was not always necessary to get what he wants. But hey, being able to freeze the blood in someone's veins is probably faster and easier than cultivating a mental lock on someone.
Yeah, it's very Machiavellian. I think it was Machiavelli, right? Like I'd rather people fear me than love me.
Yes, it is better to be feared than loved.
Yeah,
That's the prince.
It's like it's a very we are seeing that manifested in Finnegrin. It feels like I'm going to. He never says that. He's never like, I'm going to control you through fear, but it's implied that everyone knows that he has the power to freeze them, right? Like, and so it's one of those things where he may like all he has to do is threaten it once, and everybody's like, oh, okay, this guy. Yeah, and it commands a certain element of power, and that power gives him control. And so there's a few things I think that are attached to that, right? It's this cultivation of, quote, loyalty by their devotion to what he can accomplish because he's so powerful, but also this loyalty out of fear of, if I don't listen to him, then I'm a dead person, right? And then there's Elmer, right? Or the Deadwood. And so it's this interesting, as you say, like, is not controlled through the fear of being like control. Like I really want like the story of becoming Deadwood. That's the story I want, of how did that happen? What are the steps and tactics used to lead to such, like, frankly, I'm gonna say dehumanization. This has been a theme this season, but it's not dehumanization, right? Because Elmer's not human. But it's this depersonalizing, this depersonhood of a person. Okay, I've lost my track. Anyway.
No, I think you're definitely onto something that I kind of want to. I mean, I think there's no kind of like, secret story in a box that we've written of the entire backstory of Deadwood and Elmer, etc. But like, I think you can infer a great number of things just based on what you see in the show. I mean, on the island, on the ship, Elmer seems to be the only one of his kind. Finnegrin frequently refers to him as, things like teak, freak, etc. Very kind of like, marginalizing language, very isolating language. And I think it's kind of going back to the quote at the top of the show. It's easy to kind of like tangle up ideas of belonging and love and so on with that kind of fear and thoughts of home. It's like, has Deadwood ever thought that there was anything else he could do but this? Does he think anyone else would ever understand him, quote unquote, like Finnegrin does, et cetera, et cetera? And I think if you're able to, over time, and I imagine this horrible relationship probably goes back a good length of time. If you truly isolate someone and make them able to, completely doubt their sense of self, you can do some truly horrible things to their brain.
Yeah. I don't think that this is off the mark to compare this to like a domestic abuse experience either, where there are times in which, excuse me, where people will question how someone would stay with an abusive partner. And like, there's a lot of judgment around, like, why don't you just leave? And I think what we're seeing is this is a version of how that can manifest, in the sense that when you don't know you can leave, when you don't know there's a better option, when you don't know. And so like this moment of Soren resisting by choosing to take physical violence and show that you can stand up to this and show that there's another way, is a really interesting like situation here. Because like, what Soren is showing Deadwood is that he is lovable and he is worthy of someone caring for him, even though he is doing these things. And I think that it's really fascinating that Soren is the one, like, Rayla was about to go nuts and take on Elmer, and it was about to be a big deal. And then Soren's like, no, that's not what he needs. And there's something to say about the kind of control Soren has over himself and how that led to the gaining of control from Deadwood to Elmer. How we like what's going through y'all's heads as I talk about that. That was a lot.
No, I mean, I think it's pretty clear. Soren kind of directly alludes to it that he sees in Deadwood something he himself has been through a shade of, right? And I kind of want to contrast to Callum's reaction when he suddenly feels this kind of loss of control is to suddenly try and physically attack Finnegrin. He tries to punch him in the face, and that's his kind of like reassertion of control over this situation. Obviously, it doesn't work in that moment. But I think there's only so much control that one individual person, even if they have special magical powers, can exert over a situation. And what Finnegrin has cultivated over this time, over an entire crew, an entire island of ne'er-do-wells, etc., is kind of the power of narratives in people's heads and so on. I think we'll get into that a little bit with maybe the B plot in a while. But I think Soren can kind of see and remembers all the times that he tried to use his individual actions to, exert control over a situation. He thought his dad didn't love him because Soren wasn't good enough. And then he spent a long time trying to be knight in shining armor who did, all the, important things that his dad would want him to do for the greatness of humanity, et cetera, maybe almost killed a child who was meant to be king. And none of that worked. None of that was the correct thing to do at all. And I think, Soren did eventually have the realization, the epiphany that that was not how to exert control over the situation. He kind of had to relinquish that as kind of a futile goal. So I think here Soren is now able to see again, I'm not going to beat this into submission. I do have something I can offer though in this situation, which is empathy and maybe a chance to have this person see outside of the story they've been told about who they are this whole time, and maybe see something more true and less harmful to themselves.
Just to tag onto that very slightly, the moment where Soren sort of stops attempting to be the person that in season 3 Viren is asking him to be, and more or less sort of forcing him to be it, is a moment where Soren realizes that the greatest amount of control he can exert over the situation is to simply leave, which is an extremely powerful. I people go to therapy to learn that. I did. I had to go to therapy to learn that you can just walk out, which it's such a powerful, it feels like relinquishing control, but in some sense, it's very much taking a great deal of power back. And so I really like that Ian, that you've pointed out that moment for Soren comes in a way where control is muddy. You could say oh, he's running away, he's doing this, that, and the other. But to me, he really is saying the best thing for me is to friggin' leave and, go have a Sprite somewhere else. I'm trying to bring back the Sprite thing, but yeah, he goes to the Stormspire to have a Sprite. Anyway, that's important. That's an important beat for Soren.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because there's so much going on. There's so much going on. Okay, hard to control the conversation. Soren, I'm feeling a little hesitance around what I'm trying to say, because I'm worried it's going to come out wrong. But Soren demonstrates for us a tactic for helping people to find their own personal sense of control. His tactic is to get wailed upon. And I don't think that the show is arguing, nor do I think I am arguing, that in order to do this, you should put yourself in a position to get wailed upon. However, what you just gave it language was Soren was empathetic. Soren continued to offer grace despite the continued behavior. And it's this weird position of like not everyone is in a place where they can do that, not just emotionally, but has the physical resilience to withstand that kind of experience, right? Like Soren is bloodied by the end of this. Like that, no, in no world am I going to say, all right, everyone, go get punched. But in the same way, I am going to argue that this is a form of nonviolent resistance that demonstrates that change is possible, right? Through grace, through empathy, through compassion. And I don't know, perhaps under different circumstances and under a different environment where your oppressor is not literally right next to you, that may be, you can choose different tactics. But I don't know, in terms of like, how do we get out of the control of our oppressors, our abusers, our people? Say no. You're like, walking away is something that we can learn about. And then when people are able to demonstrate compassion, empathy, etc., that feels very complex to me. I'm curious if either of you can help me, maybe, or if I've completely missed the mark.
I definitely agree. I don't think the show is looking directly at the audience and saying the best way to make people understand and see the abuse in their situations is to just get hit a lot. I do think the show has a lot to say in complex ways that are often sometimes contradictory, because that's the nature of existence.
Exactly.
There is no one answer about how to stop like cycles. Cycles of violence is such a cheesy term at this point, but it really is kind of about that. Like how to make people see themselves in and their roles in these things that perpetuate. And I think this is a tactic that Soren is uniquely capable of presenting in this situation where, I think Ian was right in pointing out that Callum almost proved to Deadwood Elmer that he's right to follow Finnegrin, in that here's this violent little thing that Finnegrin's trying to control, gets out of control for a minute, Finnegrin gets punched. Of course, like what we needed here was more physical assertion of dominance. Whereas Soren, there's actually the moment where he wards off Callum and Rayla and gives him the space to let Deadwood do this performance of, asserting Finnegrin's will. And Soren's unique way of giving Finnegrin the space to sort of like do what the only thing he knows, but not make him, it's not his fault. This is again very, very complicated, very, very nuanced, and I don't want this to come across as like this is the main theme of the show ever, but this is one particular example of like empathy and forgiveness of someone who has, perpetuated Finnegrin's cruelty. But Soren is in a place where he can understand that that's not who Deadwood Elmer ultimately is or wants to be, and giving him the space to see that and actually play out a situation in which, his method of exerting control doesn't prevail, really gives Deadwood the space to realize like, oh, this isn't necessary, like I don't have to, there's another way.
Okay, forgive me. I'm going to connect this to another piece of fiction that just boom, blasted into my head. So I was a fan of the Inheritance cycle, which is Aragon and the 4 books where everybody goes dragon riding. And in this book, they utilize a language which is not an uncommon trope, in which you cannot lie. And everyone has a true name, so to speak. And if you know someone else's name, you have power over them, things like that. And your true name shifts and changes as you grow and as you become and as you change throughout your life. And what I'm thinking about is Deadwood has become Deadwood. This name is something that he has begun to embody since he has adapted it and has become an identity. And I think what happens is Soren is like awakening and reimagining this identity in a way that Deadwood shifts to Elmer, right? The literal identity changes. And what is required for that to accomplish is Soren has to show him and remind him that that is already within him. And it's this weird it's this weird, interesting thing where we have to begin to see ourselves and imagine ourselves differently than we have been acting for so long. And that's really hard to do. And I think that's one of the things that Soren is able to accomplish here. Is that too out of left field, or does that like resonate with either of you?
No,
No,
that
it
feels
absolutely
yeah.
does. I mean, we kind of talked about this before about, part of Finnegrin's kind of isolating tactics is to make Elmer believe he's someone else. He's Deadwood with a certain set of qualities, most of them not very good and would not be appreciated anywhere else but the ship, etc., etc. And Soren, he kind of has a lot of jokes in season 4 and 5 about how it's so fun to be one of the noble adventurers now, right? Like he has kind of reinvented himself in a lot of ways and has tried to like cast, the things he probably regrets doing in the past as like, that was my bad guy arc, I'm on my good guy arc now. And I think that this kind of like the story has probably played out a number of times where Finnegrin says, okay, this person's not doing what we want them to do. Deadwood punch them. Deadwood punches them. Maybe he has to punch them a second time in some cases, but generally, no. They then acquiesce to what Finnegrin wants, etc.
Yeah.
And yeah, we're not advocating that in real life you should literally get yourself punched if you're in this kind of violent situation. Do whatever you can to get help and so on. But this is Soren's way of being able to tell a different story. Soren manages to, he stands up, but he doesn't fight back. He's refusing to be defeated in this way, but he's desperately trying to express to Elmer, this doesn't have to be who you are. You can stand up to a person like this. And hey, especially you do have physical power in this situation. You just have to be awake to see it.
Yeah. Oh, it's just, I just think about how difficult it is to literally, how attached we are to our identity and how much it shapes us, and how frankly unaware we are of our awareness of our identity sometimes. And I wonder what it would do for us to cultivate awareness for our personal control, not only control of ourselves, but just our sense of being able to release control and feel free to cultivate more awareness of our various identities and how they affect us, right? And how they shape us and mold us throughout the world. Oh, okay. I want to keep on this for just a minute because I want to lean into two moments that are pretty pivotal, I think, for understanding control in relation to Finnegrin. One's at the beginning, and one's when Callum goes all Ocean Arcanum. And so the first being the beginning, where Finnegrin's giving this speech to Callum saying, Domina Profundus is the worst because she limits my control. And the way he phrases it is that essentially anything that limits his freedom is a signal to him that he is lacking in control. And so that to him is like, okay, now I'm going to remove the stimulus that is preventing this. And so I'm going to kill Domina Profundus. And, Domina Profundus has more power than Finnegrin does. Like, she is literally more powerful. And does that therefore mean that she has more freedom? And to Finnegrin, it seems like it does, because he's outside of control here. And so I'm curious. I say this one to illustrate my question around, I guess, like, what is the relationship between freedom, control, and the fact, and freedom, control, and power, I guess, especially in relation to, like, I'm thinking about government, right? In order to be free, the government has to have a certain amount of control, right, in order to legislate. and like, I don't know, I'm gonna pause here. There's a lot going on, but relationship between freedom, control, and power is, I'm curious about y'all's thoughts on that relationship, generally speaking. It's a simple question.
A simple question where we just, answered the unsolvable questions of government and the relationship between power and freedom. I'm not going to answer your question because I'm rude, but I will say that like the relationship between freedom and power is sort of like, it is what ends up driving Callum. And I know, talk about Finnegrin for just a sec, but the nature, to me, the most interesting part of the episode is that exact question, and it
Yeah.
manifests in Callum because when he learned the Sky Arcanum, it was a sort of like freedom realization. And when he learns the Ocean Arcanum, it's almost the opposite. It's recognizing that that may not be as real all the time as it felt in, that beautiful moment where you recognized the wideness of the world, the opportunity within it, and your infinite sort of like ability to reach it. And now he is realizing a very opposite and painful thing. But yeah, that doesn't really answer your question. That just says like, hell yeah, those are the themes.
Well, I mean, I nerd out when you say that, because it makes so much sense that someone would go from the sky to this, again, to this concept of like freedom and like the just, oh my gosh, and then going to like, nope, I have no control. It's just a big old mystery, and I thought I was free, but I'm not, because I'm a slave to all of it. And like, part of me wonders if it's the relationship between if it's this precise question that makes it so that he is able to make this choice around this dark magic choice, right? Because I think that a lot of it is this pressure that his friends are literally at risk. But I also think that he's able to escape and access the Ocean Arcanum at the same time that he allows himself to do this dark magic. And so I find that to be an incredibly compelling thing, that those two things are talking to each other. So I totally see that's how you answered it.
I do want to like pull it back to Finnegrin just for a second, because I think there is a sort of implied similar story to how he functions. And that is the relationship with Domina. I feel like Finnegrin was this, and I don't mean to say this is the explicit canon. This is more just like the summary of how I've thought about him. Is this incredibly powerful ocean mage who had a ship, had a crew, felt like he was the most powerful sailor on the ocean, whatever you want to flex. He's flexing. Somehow he crossed this all-powerful archdragon who absolutely open palm dunked him. Just like with a show of force that I think like honestly traumatized him a little. Like, and the sea shanty kind of goes into this. It is intended to be a bit of a song about a shipwreck and someone refusing to drown as a result of the shipwreck. And I think that really awakened in him a sort of, the transition from I was free to I have been harmed, and now I need to prevent that from happening ever again. What methods of power do I have at my disposal to exert control over this? And his choices are quite monstrous. And I think Callum goes through a really similar arc in a smaller scale, where he's had all control removed from him. He's powerless. He feels like he can't save the people he loves. And he is forced to use the tools at his disposal to sway the outcome in his favor. And one of the tools he chooses is something that, does not feel like himself, but it sure is a tool that he has in the moment, and he makes that choice. So anyway, that's my long spiel about Finnegrin and Callum as intentionally kind of like going through this event that forces them to have a different perspective on what it means to exert control over something.
There for it. Yeah.
We get a little kind of preview. I mean, you mentioned, big questions of government. I don't know if we'll get into that kind of thing, but we can use our small example of dragon government, where when someone steps out of line, sometimes literally when a human crossed the border, Avazandum would kill them, it seemed like. When Finnegrin exerted, control that was seen as improper, Domina probably intended to kill him. Probably didn't think, I'll just smash this guy's boat and leave him to drown, and he'll probably come out okay and grow as a person. I don't know if that was going through her mind. But then there's kind of a preview in an earlier episode this season where Claudia is fighting against a dragon, a kind of, small version of this very same encounter, and it's kind of like you're used to having all the power in these situations, and that's changing, and that kind of terrifies you, and that's kind of the seemingly the way Finnegrin kind of responded with I have been put into a place where I lack power, and the best way to never feel that again is to amass more power, and also destroy the things that could exert power over me. So yeah, I mean, when you talk about kind of like the relationship between freedom and power, and yeah, like I think what we're often trying to say in the show, but also trying to grapple with the difficulties of making it happen, is when all of your principles are backed up by the point of a sword. The people who disagree with them are very likely to respond in kind. And it's an enormous challenge that is not going to come with problems, but at least striving to do something else, I think, is valorous.
Yeah. Yeah, during both of those comments, I was thinking about how we are so reactionary as a species, in that when there are so many stories around having, when someone falls in love and they get burned, the tendency is to, oh, well, I'm never going to fall in love again, never doing that again, I'm going to put up this wall and prevent it from happening. And usually the story is, okay, how do I come out of this and unfold, right? And that is the reaction when people, this fight or flight instinct that you're talking about with Finnegrin in relation to Domina, and that with Callum, with Claudia, when you get burned, you are like, okay, now I'm going to do everything in my power to prevent that from ever happening again. And there's this weird tendency to just, the pendulum goes way too far, and it's just this discernment around, okay, how do I tell if I'm going too far? And that's something that I think we have a lot to learn, and I think maybe we will continue to learn that. But I want to be mindful of time and give us a little attention to the B plot. Is there a moment in this with Kareem, Junaid, anybody in this section that is calling your name that you want to go to first?
I think Kareem's entire philosophy is about trying to have control over something that you cannot have extreme control over. I mean, he speaks entirely in the narratives of history, in the strength of our culture, and so on and so forth. And I think that kind of like traditionalist mindset is often trying to grapple things that are too big and too weird and too complex to tell simple stories about. And that's what Kareem is always trying to do. But I think what's interesting is Kareem loses here. He often loses. He's a little loser. But the power of that narrative that he's managed to kind of like, he's planted those seeds. People are starting to hear his message, and the story is powerful enough to win him the season in the end anyway. And like telling people that kind of story that's easily understandable, that speaks to some part of their own identity, something they feel like they're losing control over, can, I think, sway people a great distance. I mean, in this episode, I think Kareem reaches too far in having control over something that he doesn't truly understand. A figure like Kim Dale, who, Moon Primal, her loyalties are much more elusive and shifting than I think Kareem really understood at the time. And he gets burned on that front. He was relying on something he took as like an iron truth, and Kim Dale in the end is like, well, I don't really care about your little stories. All I care about is this choke around my neck, and the rules around that are not quite what you thought they were. That's very sun magic, by the way, in comparison to everything else we're talking about. There's a thing around my neck that's going to kill me, and it's bound by very, very specific iron truths. Anyway, that's for, I don't know, 6 years from now when we're doing a retrospective on this. But yeah, Kareem tells himself a very simple story about how this is going to go. He doesn't actually have control over the situation, and he loses. But he wins the war because of all that stuff I said earlier. So that's my speed run of trying to understand Kareem's attempt to have control both in this episode, but also over his entire life. I hope it made sense.
Okay, I hope y'all will forgive me. I'm gonna say it. I think Kareem's narrative is an incredible allegory for the Make America Great Again campaign. I am being blunt about it. Like, it is this constant callback to what used to be normal. We want to get back and go back to what once was, because that's when we were best. And it's really interesting because it's this nationalist, hyper traditionalist, hyper everything, to the point where he's willing to kill his sister, like, in front of her, right? Like, just do it. Oh, you won't do it? I'll do it. And it is a very dangerous perspective. And I don't want to discount the value of the heritage he is trying to preserve. That is important and necessary. And the way he is going about it through this means of attempting to maintain control in this way feels very Trumpy to me. I'm gonna pause there. And just like, again, how off base am I here?
I don't think you're necessarily off base. I think that's one of those things where it's hard not to play it kind of cagey as writers, but it's not as though we can avoid sort of putting our personal feelings on our current real life existence into our work in some capacity. I will say, to Kareem's favor, I do think he has suffered an incredible trauma. Like, the damage to his culture is, in this case, kind of real, whereas I would say that the damage to the culture that the Make America Great campaign is fear-mongering and, at its core, very, very hateful. But, and again, this sounds like so dangerously almost apologetic, but there was a violence done to the Sunfire Elves, but Kareem's reaction to that is one of exerting control and power in a way that is weaponizing, fear and picking the wrong targets. I think that it's all very complicated. So I do just want to say, like, it's not meant to be like a one-to-one, but it is for sure something that we thought about and can't really escape. Again, like, it comes out of our brains. What do you want? It's
I think that's really important to highlight too. And I'm not intending to imply that it's a one-to-one comparison. There are, however, significant themes that are similar that help us, perhaps, when we critically engage this story in the Dragon Prince, help us critically engage real life as well. And I think you've given us some really important differentiating factors, right? The differences that this trauma that Kareem and his culture has experienced is very real, right? And very important to consider. And that also begs the question of, when, like, I think oftentimes people attempt to judge how someone bounces back from trauma, which is, I think, judgment is fair. How we judge is important. But what happens here is Kareem is unilaterally making a decision for a significant group of people. And it is becoming it's interesting because he's garnering a significant following, right? Because I think you were talking about this, is he simplifies things to a point where it's like, it becomes binary, it becomes black and white, it becomes, you're either with me or you're against me, which are common tactics used by people in positions of power and privilege that would leverage the masses against others. So yeah, I don't know. It's this weird attempt to seize control as a trauma response, which we already realized is something we do when we're burned by love, which is seemingly less innocuous. We attempt to seize control. This is just what it looks like on a grander scale, right? It's an attempt to seize control, and I'm going to do everything to prevent that from ever happening again. It's the same, but just on a very different scale. It feels like, right?
Also,
Like, right?
yeah, I think to both of your points, one thing to note is that even though they are all sort of like quote faceless NPCs, the Sunfire Elves themselves are all people of agency and people who have been harmed and people who are looking for a way to re-exert control over their own path too. And I think, quite honestly, good, way of looking at the Trump comparison with Kareem is from certain perspectives, he's a buffoon. Like how can he keeps losing. He's not actually that great at the things he claims to be great at. However, the things he is saying and doing are having an effect on people. And in the background, this sort of like this churn is occurring that is, outside of even like the spat between Kareem and Janai on a personal level. Like people are responding. And like Ian said, like he is winning in that he's starting to sway a not insignificant amount of power towards himself, despite in the moment coming off as this, repeat loser. Which again, from a perspective of real world, that's kind of how I feel about MAGA shit.
Yep.
Sorry, Ian, I keep interrupting and you clearly want to say stuff.
No, I mean, I think we're kind of hitting all the points here, but I mean, I think Kareem is constantly trying to simplify. He loved telling that story in season 4 about how a big bloody war got reduced to 2 people fought each other, and that's really comforting, right? Like if we could just reduce literally everything in the world to extremely simple stories, right versus wrong, we're gonna beat them. Then you feel like you have a complete understanding of the world. You feel like you can move about in security and safety. You feel like you have control. But again, there's no easy answer. If you're going to rally people, no one's going to stand up and be like, I'm running for president, and my stance is everything's really complicated. I don't know. We'll figure it out, I guess. Maybe, or maybe we won't. And that's okay too. Like that's not a rallying cry to anything. So I think,
And
this is kind of going beyond into like, how do we solve all of humanity? But what is a kind of like way to tell simple stories that do nevertheless manage to allow for the complexities and nuances of the world?
yeah, I mean, I think that the world would be better off if we could collectively embrace the ocean arcanum. Right? Like I think the world would benefit greatly by recognizing that I have no control. I am at the mercy of the ocean, or that which is something that is greater than myself, right? Whatever that is for you, is whether it's love, whether it's the ocean, whether it's whatever it may be, there is something that is greater than me, and therefore there's just an element of like the unknown that we all kind of have to embrace, that we will never know the mystery of everything. And whoa, it is such a thing in our culture, and I say our culture meaning not just the United States, but like a Western culture, to presume that we have way more control than we do. And I think that's why this conversation is so compelling, right? Is that this is too real. It's real, right? Ugh. Yeah.
Yeah, this episode is actually the result of like several years of taking psychic damage from the real world. It's it's pretty clear.
Yeah. Oh man. I'm also reminded, I had a great conversation about the reflections leading up to this season. We didn't get to all of them, but the one about Kareem was particularly interesting because our guest changed my perspective a little bit, because I am clearly biased against Kareem. Like my reading is not very generous, and their reading of Kareem was very generous. And I was like, dang, that's so important, because I just never considered that perspective. And like all of these people are more expansive than the binary that we sometimes offer them. And I think we do a great job on this podcast of expanding particularly the dragang, the heroes, so to speak. And I must admit that I am sometimes like a victim of my own personal biases when it comes to the villains, right? Or the quote villains, in that I sometimes am limited in seeing their expansiveness as well. You know, because Finnegrin has a story. Finnegrin has a long story that I'm sure that, you know how all the, have been a series of books recently that came out from the villain's perspective. So Wicked being one of them, from Wicked Witch of the West, and there's a bunch of versions of those. And you know, I'm sure that if there was a story written from the perspective of Finnegrin, that we would see him as the protagonist. It just so happens that we are biased in the way that this story is being told. And part of being a part of this Ocean Arcanum is recognizing that we don't have the whole story. And right?
Well, from his perspective, for sure, I think he would make the argument that I'm the coolest boy who's never done anything wrong, and it was in fact the world's, you know, cruelty to me that made me what I am. But again, it's perspective. Like, I'm sure you could write a very sympathetic story for him that might make you question, you know, how much am I rejoicing at his fate? You can inject all sorts of. I could do a tragic backstory for like anybody, honestly, because it's my favorite silly juice to play with. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, from the takeaway for Finnegrin for me is this is what happens when someone, like you said earlier, the pendulum swings so hard back from an experience that hurt them to something now they are an agent almost of that hurt rather than themselves in a way. And I truly love him because he's simple in that regard, and what a useful narrative tool.
Yeah. And I think this goes without saying, is that, you know, just because we have that sympathetic backstory doesn't mean that they don't deserve to be held accountable for their actions. And I think that's true of Kareem. I think that's true of any villain. And I say villain liberally here. But it also is that for our quote heroes as well. Like, I think that we should all be held accountable for the things that we do that harm others, even if our intent was for the quote greater good.
I think if we wanted to do an even messier version of this whole episode, we could have chosen accountability, and we would have just like spun our heads into the sand and died, because it's very, very, very difficult.
Yeah. Oh man. Alas, we chose control, and I can no longer control what we have already done. And so I will just keep it on the recording, and we're going to head into our next segment, folks. So stay with us. Welcome back. We're glad you're still here. We are going to dive into our final couple of segments with you and with our guests, and I'm thrilled that they are joining us for our sacred practice this episode. And our sacred practice this time is called the Wonder Square. And if you can imagine a 2x2 grid, what happens is we will pick a random line from the show, and we're going to fill in what this normally looks like, which is a 2x2 grid. And each of those squares in that grid are think, feel, do, and wonder. So the question is, after we pick this line, what does that line make us think of? Inside the show, outside the show, any kind of way. What does it make us think of? What does it make us feel when we hear that line? What are the emotions that bubble up for us? And then what does it make us want to do? Like, oh, now that we've kind of talked about this a little bit, I feel like I should do this more or not, or something along those lines. And then finally, does it lift any questions up that are lingering for us? What are we wondering about? What's the backstory we might be questioning around, or something along those lines? And so that'll become more apparent as we step through. But Devon and Ian, I'm excited that you all are going to walk through this journey with me. We're going to kind of go in that order: think, feel, do, and wonder. And I have picked a random line. Are you ready to hear it? They are
Yes,
not.
it's very weird because we wrote this line no matter what.
Yeah, they wrote the line. So I'm going to read what they wrote back to them. The line is, why do you keep getting up? Why getting
Dang.
And so I imagine both of you, or at least one of you, knows where that line comes from. Can either of you help us remember the line from the show? Where did this happen?
Elmer asks Soren why he keeps getting up, even though all that's going to happen if he gets up again is he gets punched back down to the ground again.
Yeah.
Am I right?
That's precisely correct. Yeah. So yeah, Soren has been beaten a few times. He keeps standing up, and after the third or fourth time, Elmer's like, "Why do you keep getting up?" So I'm going to invite us into this practice, and now that we know the context and the scene that it's kind of evoking for us, what does this line make you think of? Why do you keep getting up?
In terms of, am I allowed to answer in a sort of meta way, like the process
Absolutely.
of making the episode? The delivery on that line from the voice actor, like, really hits this note of genuinely not understanding. And I don't think Deadwood has ever seen someone with this level of resilience in the face of cruelty. And
Yeah.
he's genuinely like, the thing that's going to happen to you when you stand up for yourself, literally and figuratively, is you are going to be harmed. So genuinely, why? Like, there's this, it's not like a why do you keep getting, like, it's not sneering, it's 100% earnest. And I really like appreciate the voice actor's take on that line, because I think it carries a lot of just depth for Elmer. And so that's what I think of. Not really like a deep emotional answer, but I'm often just like really, really in awe of actors' ability to instill so much into a little line.
Yeah, no, that's so good, because like I think what it like I think about when would I say this? And I'm imagining like I used to be a summer camp counselor, and like I'm thinking about like dodgeball, where these kids keep on getting up to get hit by dodgeballs. I'm like, why do you keep getting up? Like, or when I'm being snarky because I'm clearly winning, and I'm like, why do you even try? And it's the same kind of message, but I think what you're pointing to is that this is such a genuine question. Yeah, I think that, I mean, that's what I'm thinking about as you speak. Ian, what are you thinking about when you hear this line?
Funnily enough, when you first said it, I just thought about it in the context of getting up out of bed, like
Yeah.
just standing up every single day and doing something with life, even when, maybe the previous day you got up and it didn't go so good. Not many things really happened for you, etc. But then trying to ask yourself, or ask someone else, like get inside their head. What is it that makes it worth it to you to stand up, get out of bed every day and do something?
Yeah, no, like, what is this motivation, right? What are you motivated by? And I think that's a common question used by therapists, is like, what gets you out of bed in the right? Like, what gets you out of bed when you're X, Y, or Z? And I think that's a helpful question to ask, especially when we're asking it genuinely. Amazing. So yeah, whatever bubbles up is perfectly lovely to hear. And we've gotten through this initial step, which is, what does this line make us think of? And so now that we've thought about it and we've elicited some thinking, I'm curious, what are the feelings that emerge for you as you hear this line, whether it's related to what happened in the episode or contextually as you think about it being asked or said in other instances? What are the feelings bubbling up?
I think for me, one feeling that I personally struggle with is it's hard to recognize change, to see that change is happening. It can feel like getting up after being knocked down can feel, what's the point? Why even try? The same thing will happen again and again, or my efforts will go nowhere. I'm not personally knocked down by a large wooden man every day, but like the little things. It's like, why make the bed when it's going to get unmade again? It's like really easy to fall into a kind of defeatist attitude around things like that, and not manage to find that reason to keep getting up after being knocked down. Um, so yeah, this is a thing I do have to ask myself fairly frequently, is like try and remember that actions in the world can make change, even if it often feels like it's too big and too difficult to do anything.
Yeah. Yeah, that's big. Yeah, I think for me, as I think about this, is oftentimes when I feel compelled to ask this question in a genuine way, most of the time I'm feeling like grief or sadness in the sense of like why the world sucks. Like like why are we having to deal with all, like it's painful. And Soren's in literal pain here, but like in a way, I think emotional pain to our brain has a similar feeling to physical pain, right? Like it's um neurocognitively painful um to be in a space where, and I think to ask the question, like I was thinking about asking the question, like why are you in that space? It's like, ugh, it's terrible. But also to answer it is just, ugh, there's a lot there. So I don't know. Those are the things that bubble up for me, is that kind of grief and sadness, which is, dark, but here we are. Um, Devin, what about you?
It's very similar, by the way. All those kind of tired, existentially navel gazing type of literally why. Not to be glib about it again, but relating back to the Dragon Prince a little, I do actually think that's one of the core questions of the show is, it's very, I don't want to say preachy, but it kind of is about like peace is possible, like you can make a difference in the world. But then I think one thing about Mystery of Erebos to me is that it's a little bit of a challenge on the naivety of those statements. And I think this particular line invokes that feeling of like, but is it though? Like there's always going to be those moments when you're trying to be that person, when you're trying to be the hero, when you're trying to preserve the goodness in yourself, that asks you like literally why, if the world is going to continue to be a terrible place on the whole. Like what is the point? And there's not a good answer for that as a human. You kind of have to find the answer yourself. Like what are the small things that make it worth it, or what motivates me to get up every day and do my best. But yeah, it's definitely the slightly cynical is again the wrong word, but the realistic undertone to a show that's all about, kids attempting to change the world is the world even changeable, and should they just stop? So yeah, that's how I feel is
Oof. This line got some feelings for us. This is good. Um, Okay, so we're halfway there. We've gotten through 2 steps out of 4. The third step is, what is this line calling us to do? What is it asking of us to do in our own lives? So I'll let that marinate for a second, and then whomever is ready first can share.
I think it's kind of I'll do the very literal version, which is it's asking you to get up, to find the reason, to ask yourself, okay, literally why, and to come up with a motivation, which can be monstrously difficult sometimes. And I think the context of the line and the show like acknowledges that, like, oh, you're getting beat to hell. Why why do you keep getting up? Um, but it really does, it in the context of just this practice, it asks, hey, I'm asking you as a person, like right now in the world, what is it that is forcing you through the day? you know, whether it's something you're excited about, whether it's something you're scared of in the future, whether it's something that you're preparing for, like what is it that makes you do the things you're going to take action on throughout the day. And I know my personal answer to that is I'm going to have a baby in less than a month, so I better be ready for that. It'll be an enormous personal failure if I don't take the appropriate steps to prepare for such an event. So it's easy for me currently. Like, oh yes, this is the motivating factor I have, but it's not always easy. Sometimes it's literally, I don't know, man. I have to go do my job, you know.
Yeah. The clarity around what and when is motivating us is interesting, right? You like this is a big shift in motivation. Yeah, interesting. Like I think about just the value of like this. You're right. It's implying here that getting up is the right thing to do. You know, the person asking it is genuinely curious why. But the context is implying that getting up is the right thing. And you know, I think for me, it's being an upstander, right? Is speaking out and saying what needs to be said. And I think about going to school and like I have 8 months left and I am so ready to be done. And there are definitely days where I'm like, gosh, I just like, I don't even need to do, why am I doing this? And it's just like this motivation of just get up and do it. Isn't really compelling. It's the get up, do it, because what you're doing is going to mean something for a lot of people when you're a therapist and doing that work, right? And sometimes I stop at just get up and do it. But if I remember my why, as Simon Sinek would say I'm way more likely to get out and get up. So I guess I'm just compelled to focus on crafting and cultivating what my why is as it continues to adapt and shift and change. Which brings us to Ian. What is this line calling you to do?
Yeah, I think there's a kind of like consider intention, like really examine some of the things. It's, you know, it made me think of the getting up out of bed, the routine aspect of things, the doing it to doing it kind of thing. And I think, you know, why do you keep getting up? It's asking you specifically, like, you know, consider yourself, consider the areas you do have control in the world, consider the places you can make a change. And whenever that kind of like defeatist attitude comes in, or like, what's the point of doing this thing? Like, try and catch yourself doing that, and actually think to yourself, like, you know, what things do I have control over? Which things have I kind of like, you know, given up on too readily, and things like that. Why do you keep getting up?
Yeah. Thinking on that question. All right, everybody. We are running through. We're doing really well. We are pros, it feels like, at this. Like, we know we didn't need any practice. We got this down. Line 4, the step 4, I should say, is what are we still left wondering? As we hear this line, what are the questions that come up for you, if any? And so I'll read it one more time. Why do you keep getting up?
I wonder about Elmer himself. This is sort of where we leave him in, you know, in the context of his story. It is this question, it is this moment that sort of drives him to get up a little bit. And he turns on his master, he opens up a new path for himself, but I have no idea what that looks like or what he's gonna, you know, experience, what that choice means. But I think, you know, he smiles, his cool, goofy smile, and there is some reassurance that like this was, of course, a scary, world-altering choice and change for him, but he has chosen to get up and pursue this new, wide open world, and I think it's a very optimistic one for him. And so I just wonder, what's that guy going to get up to? I hope he has a good time. I hope the world is, you know, he he now has the opportunity to see the kindness in the world instead of the spooky darkness, and I hope it goes well for him.
Yeah. Oh, me too. Yeah. I think I was actually thinking on a similar vein here, but I was wondering, I think as he kind of has this relationship with Soren that is now newly cultivated, like he makes the decision to like end a person. Like he throws it's implied anyway that Finnegrin is no longer with us because he was eaten by a Leviathan. But I wonder, like, does Elmer, like, he had a long relationship with this person and it was not healthy. But I'm curious what his lingering thoughts are after this, right? After this huge moment. I'm just curious how it sits with him the next day in the next couple of weeks. Yeah, that's what I'm wondering. What about you, Ian? If anything.
It makes me wonder if anyone ever stops asking themselves this question. Like, is it possible to reach such a place of like such great understanding of your own identity, that kind of like deep ocean arcanum feeling, but also sprinkled in with a bit of that sky arcanum? I know exactly what I can do. My goals are so clear every day, and I don't have to ever ask this question. I mean, like Devin alluded to, it's possible that something like the sharpening of motivation of
Yeah.
there's a child here and child must be taken care of. Um, that I think that can definitely clarify for a while. But then even thinking ahead into the future, like helping to shape a person who will eventually ask these questions themselves, almost feels like that's just going to be a never-ending journey of trying to figure out my identity, my place in this world, my understanding of it, my attempts to put something out into it before my relatively brief existence here is over. Damn, got grim.
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. I think my grim answer is no, you'll never answer those questions, and that's okay. And
Well, thanks, Devin.
That's the ocean arc.
sorry, man. Yeah, the ocean is dark and deep.
The tides are true. Amazing. So thank you both. We have successfully navigated this practice, and this is a practice that people can implement at home and do. I think people will see here that it really creates really cool conversation, and enables an interesting deep dive into just one specific line. Imagine doing it with every line and ever. That would be wild. But we're not going to do that. Instead, we're going to move to our final segment, which is gratitude. One, I'm grateful for both of you for being with me for this episode, but who rather is a character from this episode that you are thankful for and why?
I'm just gonna say Finnegrin because in a lot of ways, both meta, like he's the type of character I really like to write, the type of complicated and viscerally violent person that I find compelling in fiction and obviously terrify me in real life, but I had a great time writing this character. I also think it is so useful and fascinating and reflective to both write and to experience characters that represent a sort of like swing of the pendulum so far that like have they swung off into irredeemable, lost too much of themselves type territory. It's some of the most cathartic and difficult and challenging type of fiction to engage with, and I'm like really grateful that we got to play with such a character in a show that is ostensibly for children, because I think it's important to sort of like both you will encounter people like that in your life. Obviously, you're going to have to learn how to reconcile people like this, but also to see the potential for every single one of us to swing that way and to become like this. And so I'm really grateful that we got to do a character like that in The Dragon Prince, because I think he represents a lot of the pricklier side of some of our more optimistic tone. And just thanks, Pirate Man.
Yeah, absolutely. Ian, how about you?
I almost feel like we didn't spend that much time talking about Callum, who's a very central part of this episode. But in a kind of meta sense for why I'm grateful for Callum in this episode, I talked before about how difficult this one was to break. A lot of like sitting in silence, and those moments always bring back the fear of like, I'm a fraud. I've never been able to write anything at all in history. But when this one came together, I just remember that all of Callum's actions in particular, once we kind of like got the ball rolling, felt very alive. Felt like we'd really kind of like dug deep into this guy's brain. And I think a lot of, you always hear, once you've understand your characters well enough, they'll surprise you. Those kind of act, and I kind of forget that, and I sometimes think that's kind of corny. There's always the work of writing to be done, but I think with the kind of thematic groundwork that I felt like we had done here, and kind of surprised ourselves to discover that we'd done here without always being conscious of it. Callum really had a kind of very full and alive sequence of actions in this episode that really made me appreciate him. I feel like you don't see any of it happen, but it must have been a kind of torturous moment of self-doubt that it becomes realization when he really hits on the Ocean Arcanum when he's below decks and decides to do dark magic, decides to admit that this is a complicated part of himself that he doesn't fully understand, but this is how he's going to take control of this situation. I mean, that I can kind of feel his feelings in that moment. So yeah, this was kind of a relatively early pandemic one to write, and it going through that journey with Callum, I was pretty grateful to do.
I love that. That's so true. I feel like recently, especially in this season, and not just this season, but like it feels like Callum has been we have been given the most expansive look at Callum's journey as opposed to the rest of the characters and his decisions as to why he is making the dark magic versus the arcanum versus X, Y, and Z. I feel this might just be me, but it feels as though we've got the most expansive version of him, and I just think that really came out in this episode as well. Like, so yeah, and that's probably just due to the nature of like, in order to expound about how you learn an arcanum, you need to like walk the viewer through how their mind process. So yeah, I think as we encounter the arcanums in our own lives, we recognize how expansive we are too. But I digress. I'm really grateful. Like, there are so many people I can be, like Soren, like what an incredible servant. Like, oh my goodness, what a joy. Like everyone in the drag gang who's like, let me give my hand up for you, Callum, is like they're just like so willing. And it felt kind of like a bit, but at the same time, it was genuine. But I'm going to choose Amaya. And this is partially because of a result of our conversation during the Wonder Square, but this why do you keep getting up? I feel like Amaya has a really good sense of her why. And she is very able to make decisive decisions around how and when to protect other people, has a very good sense of who's in power and who deserves to be protected. And I feel like she navigates in a very with a lot of clarity. And so I'm really grateful for that model for us. I as viewers, I'm really grateful for that model in light of our conversation. It feels like she probably has a good answer to that question around why she keeps getting up in the morning.
Can I do a bonus secret one?
A bonus not so secret one.
In preparing for this episode, I thought a lot about Rayla's largely off-screen journey with all these themes, and how they kind of relate to the understanding of Ocean Arcana that we come to here. But it really goes back to when she revealed that she had this fear of water to Callum, and kind of articulated about how when she's on land, she's very sure of herself. She knows where her feet are going to fall. As an assassin whose job, requires that kind of physical control, she hates the water and the lack of sureness it gives her. And then all these kind of moments throughout the seasons of Rayla deciding to make a great personal sacrifice to take the entire burden on herself because she knows she'll have control over it in that case, right? And we don't really draw a huge amount of attention to it, but spoilers, in the next episode, she kind of has a breakthrough with being able to put herself into that kind of water situation that she talked about hating before. But I think there's been a kind of like slower burn realization for Rayla that there are depths she can't understand, things she's going to have to be okay with not being in control of. And I think that kind of like neatly tied into her ability to get over this kind of this fear, this phobia.
Oh God, that's so true. Yeah, spoiler alert, next episode's great. I've already recorded it. It's gonna be lovely. And it's a great end of the season. Can you believe we're already almost there? It's almost the end, y'all. Everybody watched the season 30 times before now. It's fine. Okay, everyone, we finally did it. We have achieved another episode, achievement unlocked. Devon and Ian, if you are interested in being found by our listeners, how would you like them to do so?
You may not find me. No, I'm just kidding. I'm still on Twitter, despite the fact that it's a trash fire, at Devon Giehl. And I guess the same on Blue Sky now, if you would like to migrate away from the trash fire.
Blue Sky.
Yeah, those are kind of the places that I do my silly little business still to this day, for better and worse.
Amazing. Amazing.
I'm also still on Twitter at Iain A. Hendry. I could talk another entire episode about how the yawning maw of social media has made us all feel like we have no control over the paths of destiny, and how it challenges in traumatic ways our sense of identity and sense of understanding of how humanity is meant to function every single day. Yeah, but I won't. But you can read my silly little tweets over there if you'd like.
That and more you can ask questions about on Twitter. Amazing. Yeah, we're on Twitter also, BNB_pod. We'll happily answer, maybe not answer, but engage those questions with you as well. And the best place to find us, however, is of course our Patreon, BNB_pod. There we have live episodes monthly, lots of cool things happening. We're actually running an Avatar Legends campaign, and we're having a blast with some of our patrons there. There's a lot of cool things happening if you're interested. And once again, I'll thank both of you, Devon and Ian, for joining us. This has been an incredible journey. This has been an intense episode, but I think we knew that going in, considering the content. So thank you for indulging all of us.
Thank you so much for having me back. I really think we solved humanity in this one.
Yeah, for sure. It's all easy now. We got the answers.
Yeah, I know exactly how I'm going to wake up tomorrow. All right, everybody. Until next time, be well.